Beauty without cruelty. Cruelty-free cosmetics. PETA started the movement more than a quarter century ago. A little history on the list and why that bunny is on your shampoo bottle. Next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights. Brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, what's that bunny doing on my shampoo bottle? That's the symbol of PETA's Beauty Without Bunnies campaign, which became a movement more than 30 years ago. It's the only list that has no exceptions. You can rely that those cosmetic products on the list weren't tested on animals because the cruelty was unnecessary. And that's the idea that PETA has used that has changed the cosmetics industry. And now more than 5,000 brands and companies are on the list. For some perspective on the journey, here's my conversation with Kathy Guillermo, Senior Vice President at PETA, on this edition of the PETA Podcast.
There were some organizations that were talking about tests on animals, the blinding, poisoning, skin irritation tests, where chemicals are dropped into rabbits' eyes and smeared onto the backs of guinea pigs whose hair had been shaved and their skin abraded. There were people who objected to it. What PETA did in 1988 was go undercover at a cosmetics testing laboratory and come out with the video of what actually went on. And what we wanted to do was be a real resource for consumers. What could they do to oppose this testing? And where could they find cosmetics that weren't tested on animals?
And that undercover investigation, I guess, really exposed just how cruel the cosmetics industry was.
People had no idea what was going on in these places. And we were not talking about rabbits and mice only. And I don't want to minimize their suffering because certainly it was every bit as much as any animal. But people didn't know that kittens were being used and dogs were being used for product testing as well. And so it blew the lid off that whole industry. And we have to realize that in 1988, virtually every mainstream cosmetics company in the world tested its products on animals, even though in the US it was never required by law.
And so with this momentum of the investigation, PETA had to establish its cruelty-free list, right?
That's right. We had, in the very beginning, 12 companies on that list, and every one of them was mail order. So if you wanted to put a lipstick or an eyeshadow or on your face, or you wanted to wash your hair with the shampoo that hadn't been force-fed to rats, for example, you had to mail order that product. But we were then and have always been devoted to getting this information out to consumers. So that was the first step. We needed consumer participation, and we needed people to say loud and clear to cosmetics companies, we aren't going to buy your products if you hurt animals. However you feel about the use of animals and other kinds of experimentation, and of course, PETA opposes all of it, but however you feel about it anywhere else, when it comes to something as frivolous as cosmetics, animals don't need to die. So we began with our list, which back in 1988 was a paper list. We didn't have the internet. We couldn't email it to people. We couldn't put it online as we can do now. But we had so many requests for that. It was probably our most requested item, just as today, our Beauty Without Bunnies page of companies that don't test on animals is the most visited page on our website.
And for getting on that list, there were 12 companies in that initial list. What did they get? They got the rights to use a bunny logo on their product, or what did they get in exchange for proving that they were cruelty-free?
Companies that can pledge to us and show to us that they don't test on animals at any step of the process, from the ingredients to the formulation to the finished products. When they can show us that, and when they can pledge that that is their policy, their company policy, and will be going forward, then they are on that list, and that list is the resource for consumers. So what they get is public recognition, and this list is consulted by people who want to buy products that haven't harmed animals. And that has become, over the last several years, a very lucrative marketing tool. We now have a generation of people who have grown up knowing that they can request cosmetics not tested on animals, and they can find them. And so that is something highly sought after by companies. We do have logos available. They're not mandatory to use, but companies are free to use them once they qualify for that. But all of that came, much after a hard-fought battle to convince these companies that they didn't need to do this, that they were doing it for legal reasons to check a box and not for anything that resembled good science.
And how hard was it to prove that if I was a company and I came to you and said, I'm cruelty-free, how hard was it for a company to go through the ringer and then to show that they were essentially pure and cruelty-free?
Well, that wasn't really the difficult part. The part that was hard for the companies back in the late 80s and the early to mid 90s was to realize that they needed to put executives in charge and scientists in charge and get the lawyers out of the room. Because the reason that they were doing these tests is that they thought they needed it for legal reasons. And they thought they needed it to protect themselves against lawsuits. In fact, we did the search of the legal reviews and found out it wasn't really helping them in court, because it was pretty easily established that these rabbits and kittens and rats and mice and guinea pigs are not little humans. So the tests that were being conducted on these animals didn't necessarily translate to people at all. And the first company the first mainstream company, I should say, to make this realization was Benetton, which back in the day, the colors of Benetton was an enormously popular international company. And they were the first big target of our campaign. And I'm talking protests and letters. We didn't have emails back then, but we certainly did protests, and we protested at the stores. They got thousands upon thousands of letters and phone calls from consumers. And as the executive director of Benetton later told me, there was a moment when they were dealing with all of these phone calls and letters and protests when one lawyer said, "What if PETA's right?" And that shifted their whole discussion. Instead of defending, they began to look at, well, what if we did stop testing on animals? How would that change what we're doing? And they came to the conclusion that scientifically, they didn't need to do it. Legally, they didn't need to do it. And they became the first mainstream company to stop. And that opened the floodgate for so many hundreds of others.
You told me how Benetton felt. How did you as frontline activists felt when you were dealing with a company like this and trying to get other companies to follow? Did it seem insurmountable at times? Did it seem like this was not worth the effort, or did it make you more emboldened to go further?
It was never not worth the effort. We always knew that we would win because we knew that we had consumers on our side. And we knew that we had to escalate our tactics when the time came. And there was one point when activists protesting in front of a company actually put their feet in concrete shoes in front of that company and said, "We're not leaving," and had to be hauled away by police officers, pickup trucks, and chains put around those cement shoes. So we were willing to do what we needed to do peacefully, legally, within the bounds of civil disobedience to make that point. And, it was the beginning of so many other victories with the use of animals in experiments, because it was the first time that we could get scientists to say, okay, right, these animals are not people. Maybe we really don't learn that much from them. And on top of that, it opened a whole new area of the development of non-animal methods that has extended far beyond product testing into scientific basic research as well.
The landscape now has changed so much because of the efforts done 30 years ago.
It's a whole new area now of marketing for cosmetics companies. We're working with, instead of opposing, companies like Unilever and Procter & Gamble with their personal care products. And we've seen that field of non-animal methods development burgeon to the point where so many other kinds of chemical tests can now be stopped and have been stopped because these methods were developed because people like us and millions of consumers around the world said, don't kill animals for my lipstick.
Now, you mentioned the world. This is a global effort. Tell me about China in 2012 and tell me about the fight in Europe to make this truly a global cruelty-free phenomenon.
It is a global movement and always has been. And in Europe, parallel to the effort that we began in the United States, there were activists and there were legislators who were working to outlaw the use of animals for cosmetics testing there as well. And in the European Union, they were very progressive and passed a three-step law, the cosmetics regulation that outlawed first testing on animals for finished products. And by 2013, all testing on animals for cosmetics and ingredients was banned in the European Union. What we later found out is that loopholes began to emerge. And in 2012, we were tipped off by someone who worked for a well-known cosmetics company that these companies who had claimed not to be testing on animals were secretly paying for tests on animals in order to market their products in China. Now, they weren't conducting the test themselves, but they were certainly cognizant of it. They were paying for it, and they were hoping to fly under the radar, which doesn't happen very often because there are so many people willing to out the bad guys in situations like this. So we made that public. And we publicly shamed these companies. But it was a setback in the cosmetics testing area because China is such a big market. And we saw we were going to have to do more than consumer action. So we put together a fund and we donated it to the Institute for In Vitro Sciences in order to set up a consortium of cosmetics companies to go over to China to train the scientists there in the non-animal methods, because that was part of the problem. They just didn't have the technology that was available in other parts of the world. That has gone well, and we have made some progress in that area. And it is possible for some companies now to market products in China without animal tests. But the other issue that came up involved loopholes in the cosmetics directive in the European Union itself, where they began to allow for the testing in China without impacting their own cosmetics regulation, and then later created loopholes for tests on animals in other areas. And our PETA affiliates in the UK and the Netherlands, France, and Germany have been working on this along with other animal rights groups. And we are interveners in a lawsuit. So we're working very hard to close those loopholes right now.
So it sounds like just when you establish a level of certainty that cosmetics are cruelty-free, there's always people trying to work around them. And so I gather, can consumers ever feel 100% certain that a product is cruelty-free?
That's such a good question. And we try very hard to give them the list of companies that is not tested on animals. We are, of course, reliant upon the information that's supplied to us by the companies. And we find that if we're given bad information, then we usually find out about it in pretty short order. I can tell you that our Beauty Without Bunnies list is the only list done by any animal group that allows for no tests on animals in order to be listed. The other lists that are out there do make exceptions for some tests that are required under regulatory authority in places like China. PETA does not. I would rather have a list of 3 companies and know that those companies haven't harmed any animals than have a list of 5,000 where we're not quite sure who's done what. So we are devoted to getting the most current information out to consumers. It's on our website. It's also on an application, a phone app that you can find on our website. And can we ever be entirely sure? We come as close to that as we possibly can.
And so what should people do if they want cosmetics and personal care items not tested on animals?
The first thing they can do is go to our website. And the shortcut for that, consumers can go to PETA.org/cruelty-free, PETA.org/cruelty-free. or just go to the PETA.org website and you'll see right on there where to click to find our Beauty Without Bunnies database of companies. And we have millions of visitors a year to this site. It is, as I said, the most visited page on our website. And so we welcome all people who are interested in this to have a look. The other way to do it is to look for our logos. Now, not every cruelty-free company carries our logo, but many, many do. And you can look on the back of the product and you'll see PETA approved logo, cruelty-free or cruelty-free and vegan, non-animal tested, animal test-free and vegan. We have several iterations of the logo right now.
Is it the bunny?
We call it Beauty Without Bunnies. And yes, there is a bunny in the logo because that is the animal most associated with these tests. And I would add also that we are seeking now to work with companies to go vegan as well as animal test free, because to be truly cruelty free by PETA definition means no animal ingredients, no animal derived ingredients, and no animal testing. The companies have to have a policy that they will allow and conduct and commission no animal testing.
Is that hard for companies to comply with?
It's not hard at all unless they want to sell in China. That's really the difficulty that companies face. What I have found, and I've been working on this campaign on and off for the last 35 years, is that the companies are quite willing to forego tests on animals. They know it's meaningless at this point. They know they don't need to do it. The people who formulate these products are chemists. The people who formulate the policy understand clearly what they need to do. The only issue comes when they are required by some government regulatory authority to do it. And I can say in the US, there is no regulatory authority that requires cosmetics or cosmetics ingredients to be tested on animals. What has been a little disappointing to us is that several states have passed laws that supposedly ban the sales of cosmetics whose ingredients have been tested on animals, but most of these laws have exemptions for tests required under some regulatory authority. And that's why we say the most definitive sources are our list of companies.
Because you don't allow for any exceptions.
That's right.
In general, then, you can look back at the 30, 35 years and really be quite satisfied that you've come so far.
It's been remarkable to see. And I might just share one small anecdote. There was a trade organization for the cosmetics industry, which at the time was called CTFA, Cosmetics, Toiletry, and Fragrance Association. And it was led by a man named Edward Kavanaugh. And Mr. Kavanaugh was of the old school who believed that for many reasons, all these products had to be tested on animals and all these ingredients had to be tested on animals. And I was a frequent debate partner of his on radio and television programs. And I remember one day him screaming at me, "You will never win. We will always test these products on animals." And of course, we proved him wrong. His son is now Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh. And his father lost. But it's a great satisfaction to me to know that we proved him wrong. And that was thanks to consumer strength and consumer power and people using their voice to demand what they wanted.
Kathy Guillermo, the Senior VP at PETA, who oversees laboratory investigations and the project known as Beauty Without Cruelty. To get the list, go to cruelty-free.peta.org. That's cruelty-free.peta.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends and tell them you like the PETA Podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok. That's EMILAMOK. Or rather, you can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Emil Amok. Or see my vlog at amok.com, or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Or you can get this podcast on YouTube at Emil Amok 1. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to, as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. That's Neil on guitar. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.